So we have a lot of standards on the Chia blockchain. Most of these proposed and implemented by CNI. Some of these may be less familiar to people who haven't been here the whole time, but I think a lot of us have. So I think at least we've heard about these in passing. Lucas, I think we should talk about this process, especially given the fact that we have the community indicating that NFT may have an issue, which some would like to see better fixed, maybe an NFT two standard. Let's talk about this and how it works. First off, maybe are all of these familiar to you? Do you know all of these? I know you've been around a long time, but maybe even one of them might not be.
I mean, the verifiable credentials, the digital ID, Cat2, NFT1. I'm familiar with all of them, at least nominally. Like I know the ideas behind verifiable credentials, but I've yet to see them in action. I have a DID, Chia asset token. I know all of those basics. Message coin kind of threw me for a loop. I was not familiar with message coin. What's the story behind it?
So Message Coin came out as a standard. This was a way that you could just send an arbitrary message to anybody on the Chia blockchain, and that message would get routed, and you would have to pay something called an attention tax. So there's a certain minimum amount that you have to pay, and that amount that gets paid goes to the individual that you wanted to send a message to, presumably to prevent spam and whatever. This was something that came out. It's a relatively simple puzzle. I thought it was kind of a cool idea. So it got proposed, it got integrated into the wallet, and nothing. I mean, it didn't really do much. It didn't go anywhere. But it could have been pretty neat. And I think that this was maybe used as part of the whole, if there's an NFT out there and you want to buy it, you could route an offer to somebody. So the message coin could actually convey the offer payload, and you could use the blockchain to send that message. So it's kind of a neat idea if you think about it, that you could use the blockchain for as a communications mechanism, and to prevent spam, make them pay a certain amount of mojos, a certain amount of chia, so that you can't just send somebody a billion messages for nothing. So not only do you have to pay a fee on the network, but you also have to pay a fee to the user to ensure that they're getting paid enough to actually want to look at the message you sent. It's a interesting idea that the Bitcoin community has had, that comes up frequently whenever software gets discussed. So, Chia actually implemented it, and haven't really heard much about it. Certainly isn't being used much. I picked it up and used it because I thought it was kind of interesting. So when we did Chia Swap, I actually used this coin as part of the exchange of data. So when you're starting to set up an atomic swap, you can use this mechanism to actually exchange data, which was kind of neat. So I've used it. I really haven't seen it used much other than that, though.
Yeah, that's cool, and I'm glad you brought up software because I was going to say Jason Lowry should learn about message coin and write a book about it and bring some eyes from the from the defense industry back onto Chia. But so it was message coin a standard that was developed by CNI or somebody in the community? What how
And this is actually part of the question that we're going to talk about today: is how does this process actually work? I don't remember there being any community involvement in that. I All of a sudden it just showed up. It was there. It's like I said, it's a very simple puzzle. So to say that it's a standard or anything is, I don't know, it's a little far fetched. But at least it was just integrated into the default Chia wallet, into the full node and the wallet software, and so it's there. And so I guess it's kind of a de facto standard because it's in the standard reference wallet, but it never got discussed, the as far as was it the right amount of attention tax or whatever. Those things just sort of slid into the wallet very quietly, and it's there.
I guess, and part of the reason that I asked that is as we begin to think about some of these standards that are on the Chia blockchain, um, the divergent view of what the NFT1 standard should look like between some holders of projects and members of the community not associated with CNI, I begin to wonder, what of these standards are built with an eye towards by CNI with an eye towards the products that they need to see and need to realize um, to sustain themselves, and and what is the relationship of the community in being able to piggyback on those standards and to use them for their own ends? And is there a path or a role for members of the community to also have their own standards, or to I don't know. I'm unsure as to how that relationship is defined, and how you have a much deeper experience into the history and the development on Chia. So, what is the is there a distinction in the development of this? Because, with Lucky 8 and his concerns with the NFT1 standard, he said, I'm not going to go through the chip process. And I thought, interesting, like, can there be standards or developments that are made on the Chia blockchain submitted to the mempool that are understood and work with it, um, that don't go through the approval of CNI? How does that look like?
It is a public blockchain. Anybody can make any kind of coin puzzle type they want, and they can start using it. And if it's adopted by many, it doesn't rise to the level of standard. It's just a puzzle and a coin type that a lot of people are using. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a standard. And certainly, we've seen projects come out with very sophisticated Chia Lisp, and what they're doing doesn't necessarily rise to the level of a standard. It doesn't get touted as one. It doesn't get referenced as one. I would think something like Circuit DAO is a good example of that. And actually, one that I didn't even put on here was the DAO. Remember the DAO? Remember when that got released?
No, before my time. I didn't realize.
Yeah, there we have it. We have a DAO that code definitely got released. There is a version of it that's in existence out there. Um, yeah, it's like probably was remiss in not putting it on there. I'll probably add it for YouTube. Um, but yeah, I mean, there is definitely a set of coins out there which are not quote unquote standards. And as far as the process goes, when NFT was first coming out, we started with what was referred to as the NFT zero standard, and there was a draw from the community. We had a whole bunch of community participation. There was a private area where everybody who wanted to work on NFTs that had a stake in the game, they were invited to come to discuss it, to weigh in on it. There were things that happened. There was beta testing. So NFT, I think, was probably one of the best processes that I have seen within CNI for trying to get engagement from the community and trying to come together and build something that everybody wanted. And I think the process went pretty well. As far as what does the process look like right now, and why would Lucky 8 say something like, I don't want to go through the chip process? So the chip process is patterned on what we have within the Bitcoin and the Ethereum communities, which is an improvement process. So they all end in IP. So in Bitcoin, we have BIP. In Ethereum, we had EIP. It's the Ethereum improvement process. And then in Chia, we had CH improvement process. We had chip. And this chip process, a lot of people have not had a great experience on it. Like, it feels very, I don't know, lengthy. It doesn't really have a lot of engagement usually when people say things, and it feels kind of like there is a heavy hand in the process. At least that's the sense and the sentiment that I've heard from many, and that's why I think somebody like Lucky 8 would say, "Hey, look, I'm not going to subject myself to this. Like, I don't feel like I'm going to get a good shot. I don't think I'm going to get heard. And even if everybody said this is what we should do, it's like left to the gatekeepers to actually approve it. And how and where could I actually get of the right vote? Like, how does that actually work? So I think it's the criticism around, if it's obvious and it's a bug fix, like maybe you can get it in. But if you wanted to do something like, okay, NFT 1 is not working the way that some would expect with royalties. Is there a way to fix it? Is there a proper path to fixing it? And what would be that process and the standards process that would allow that to occur? And it right now, the way that would necessarily work is you would go into a chip. And so Lucky 8 didn't take that route. He said, I think this is a security vulnerability, and and he filed it as such. And so that's where we've gotten into a bit of a, I don't know, I guess a disagreement within the community about whether this is a security flaw, or should it have been handled as a flaw in the standard, and proposing an NFT 2 standard where royalties works differently. These things are somewhat semantic differences, and I think the reason that Lucky 8 maybe didn't take this route is because he has general disdain for having to run through that process. He definitely said some things that indicated that it was more onerous than he wanted to get involved in, and he didn't feel like he was going to get the resolution he wanted. And if that's the general sentiment out there from what I would term community developers, then that feels like something is broken there.
Well, from the time that I discovered Chia, um, I have always heard that there is an ethos of decentralization and DIY here. And I understand the frustration that Lucky 8 has, but when I think also about CNI as an institution, and what their goals are and what their relationship to a public blockchain is too, um, I can see it. I can see it from the frustration angle, but I can also see that that CNI is a company that has its own products in mind, and is asking maybe a lot. Um, I don't. It's an interesting relationship too when you think about how integral their input is with regards to plot formats and some of those consensus apparatus on the blockchain. But just to go back to these standards, when you say these are coins and anyone can write one, circuit DAO has their own puzzles. So anyone can write a puzzle in Chia Lisp that can be interpreted and read by the mempool. It was that am I correct in making that statement?
100%. Yes. You don't, I mean, this is not like some sort of a whitelisted environment where you have to be using approved standards. If somebody wanted to rev the NFT 1 puzzle and make it work differently, they could just do that and start using it. And if everybody switched and started adopting it, I guess it would be the de facto standard, just because it would be what everybody's using instead of NFT 1. Yes, 100%. You are not bound to use any of these things. If you wanted to go in and make a Cat 3 standard that fixes a bunch of stuff in Cat 2, you could totally do it, and the mempool would accept it, and it would get incorporated into the block, and it would totally work. Inscriptions was a good example of that. If you remember that craze, when inscriptions were happening on Chia, that was not an approved thing. I don't even think the Chia blockchain, canonically, the wallet, the Python code base, it never even supported it. Never even acknowledged its existence.
I may have a couple of space marmots. So God bless foods.
Well, wait a minute. That's not what I mean by inscriptions. That was a different thing. That was
Oh,
definitely fun though.
oh, okay. Whoops.
I think they still almost adhere to the NFT 1 standard. Canonically, it is an NFT 1 standard. They just did something that many found to be somewhat distasteful, but the more that time has gone on, the more it looks like maybe they were actually right. Who knows?
Well, I couldn't resist. But because hell, those marmots with lasers and helmets, who could resist that?
Well, I mean, part of that, the whole discussion was what's the right place to put the data. And as IPFS sort of, I don't know, buckled under its own weight, the whole infrastructure of like leveraging Filecoin doesn't seem to have worked very correctly, or it doesn't seem to be sustainable in the long term. putting the data into the chain makes the NFT much more resilient for sure. It does make it a lot harder to spend it, and so maybe the level of sophistication wasn't quite there. But actually putting the picture into the Chia blockchain, maybe that actually wasn't wrong. I'm gonna give those guys a little bit of latitude for the way that things have shaped up, because essentially what happened with a lot of the NFTs that got created in Chia was they all got their data put into IPFS, and they got put into I think most of them leveraged NFT storage, and those all ended up storing their data in the IPFS infrastructure, which ultimately meant that a lot of that data was in a separate blockchain. Which, I don't know, that seems a little weird, but that's what we did.
Well, at the minimum, going back to these disconnections between people's perceptions of the way blockchain works and what's actually going on, I think I what most people would see as an ideal would be that the data the data that's contained in an NFT is not linked to extraneous sources, but is all inherently contained. So I could understand the pushback with regards to concerns about filling up blocks, but then hey, isn't that kind of the idea also? Um, and we also don't have data layer on this, by the way, too. Speaking of IPFS and other standards, but
Yeah, if we were really going to make a word bubble, how many word bubbles are missing from here? DAO is missing from here. We're definitely missing data layer, and I would say that as far as those things being supported as standards, think about data layer for a second. So we had a community developer, Michael Taylor, who really jumped on data layer in a big way. I mean, he kind of grabbed that ball and ran with it as someone who rightfully had a lot of experience with it. I mean, he was the one who was working with it very intimately at CNI. And so when he started to really pound on it and really hammer it and try to do things that maybe were a little bit beyond what it had originally been designed for, he came up with something different, a different version of data layer, like a data layer 2. I don't know that that got adopted as a standard. I mean, certainly there's a project that's using it. It's a pretty funded project. It's a pretty popular project. A lot of people have been looking at dig.net and have been, diddling around with it. And definitely with data layer, we had a bunch of projects that put their NFT pixel data and metadata into data layer. And so there is a whole swath of stuff that did multi-publishing. So not everything is IPFS. And so there was some use of that. But as data layer started to show some of its weaknesses, did we go through a rev process? Do we have a new standards process? And was there any appetite for that? Because I think that it probably would have been healthier if we had. If when through the process of trying to set up dig.net, Michael Taylor had a way to engage in the broader community and CNI and have a discussion about what were some of the flaws and weaknesses within data layer and how might it be adjusted. And it wasn't even where he asked for funding from CNI, right? I mean, maybe he did, but like ultimately he ended up funding that development from his own personal means and paid some developers within the Chia community to assist with Chia list development and whatever. And now there's a new data layer. And that new data layer, it's a V2. So we could have like a data layer 2 on here if it was a standard. And I don't know that that ever came back and got adopted by Chia. I'm pretty sure Chia is still using their own version of data layer and using it for the climate action data trust. So, this process of how do we actually identify flaws and things that might need to be fixed. I would throw another example out there with Cat 2. We definitely noted that there was a deficiency in the way that Cat 2 was working. Its level of precision makes certain types of representations of other coins within the Chia ecosystem not as functional as they could be. If you think about something like you bring Bitcoin into the world of Chia, if you have a wrapped BTC, if you only have 3 digits of precision with Cat2, which is what we have right now in the way that Cat2 interprets what you actually create when you represent something as a Chia asset token, the most precision that you've got is the 3 decimal digits of precision. And that means that the smallest tradable unit of Bitcoin is something like $30 or $40. That can work, I guess, but it also means that that smallest unit, that one, Chia asset token of Bitcoin is going to fluctuate in how much it's worth, and that you can't have a small enough representation that you might want in certain types of things. And maybe that's okay, but maybe that causes you some problems if you're trying to do some things. And I would look firmly at Permuto for this as like, I'm not sure that's going to work for some of these higher value stocks that might trade, or how this actually might play out is that level of precision might just have a little bit of issue. I'm curious if that's really not going to be the case, but I know at least for some tokens, when we wanted to bring them into the Chia ecosystem, it felt a little awkward that you couldn't trade the smallest amount that you might otherwise want to. And so, if we really had a discussion about Cat 2, I think there was at one point a thought around creating a Cat 2.1 that would actually adjust this precision problem. I know that was discussed by CNI at various points, that might be on the horizon, but we never actually got that. And maybe some projects would have spoken up and said, yeah, we really would support having better precision within the asset token standard because we need it and we feel like it's lacking or missing.
I would suggest that the new standard be Cat 2.0001. Um, but jokes aside, and nobody laughed, damn it. It's interesting to think that because there can be a multitude of puzzles that we think so often in upgrading and replacing NFT 0 to NFT 1, but we can have a multitude of puzzles that exist on the chain, and some people might want the Cat 2 standard because it's a more simple puzzle and does not require as much computation or space in the mempool. And some people may want to opt to something with more precision. When I think, well, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I think it's the idea that you can build through composition. So creating novel smart contracts and smart contract programming on any blockchain is fundamentally a difficult process. Like, there is no doubt about it that the risks are high and the rewards are only if you get it really right. Think about the ramifications of getting something like cat wrong, which we did. I mean, we did. It was wrong. Cat 1 had a flaw in it and it had to be fixed. And it had to be fixed in a very, quick way. We talked about this a little bit, about that there was real money on the line because there was a flaw in it, and you could potentially go, scam a company out of a significant amount of money. Like Stably at the time, was representing real money, real value. And if you were to go bang on their door, they wouldn't have been able to tell that there was a problem with the cats that had been created uh, because of the flaw that existed in the standard. And so it does have real ramifications if some of these things have problems in them. And that building through composition, that idea is that you get to leverage stuff that has been proved to be correct, and that you don't have to go through and do your own audits and leverage all of this stuff because it's been done for you. And assumably that's what we have in Cat 2 or NFT 1 or whatever, because it's been published by CNI. It was touted as the standard. And then that means that you should be able to leverage all that goodness, all that auditing, all of that testing, all of the stuff that's been done around it, because this is a standard that's been well adopted, banged on, and looked at by a lot of people. And therefore, your risk of using it is lower. And if you were to produce your own standard, you've got to put that level of rigor into it. And asking anybody else to adopt your thing, if you haven't done that level of rigor, it seems like a big ask. Like, it's a lot of a trust around that. Like, how do we even know that your puzzle is correct, that it doesn't have some fundamental flaw in it that could be exploited later, or that you didn't actually author one into it that you're going to use later to rug everybody? Those are the risks around writing novel Chia lists, been trying to get other people to use it. Because in the world of Web3, in the world of blockchains, the client always has to support it. So if you're asking for somebody to support your puzzle, you've got to get wallets to adopt it. You've got to get things like Dexy to adopt it. Otherwise, they're not going to know how to interpret it, and it's going to look like nothing. It's just going to get ignored. So unless you're doing some kind of private thing within your own ecosystem, then there is really no ability to interact with your puzzles unless you publish them, you show other people how to do it, and you get other wallets and other clients to adopt the code that you've written.
Well, so any developer can write a puzzle that can be interpreted by the mempool and be written to the blockchain. And apart from that, we need some sort of organization that recognizes puzzles that meet a certain standard. I'm really glad that you brought up Dexy and wallets, because those were sort of the questions that were looming in the back of my mind, because those seem to be the other players in an ecosystem that can or have an interest in what might meet a standard to take some of the load off of what puzzles they are considering recognizing or supporting in their system. So can you speak? Can you you worked with a wallet? How can wallets, one, decide which puzzles they can support? And I assume it would be the same for web applications also, but it would seem that those are two pieces of the ecosystem that are integral and also have a large interest in this notion of a standard being recognized by some group that that takes the weight off of them, uh, looking at all these puzzles that might ostensibly be introduced to the blockchain and be have concerns about what the level of security or what these puzzles are being used for.
Well, it's a lot of a vote with your feet kind of a thing for wallets. Wallets, if they're going to participate in an ecosystem. So, for instance, NFT was a good example of this. When an NFT standard came out, if a wallet was going to adopt that standard, then it had to proactively go out and harvest all of the puzzles. It had to create its own software that worked within its own area of concern. So let's say Gobi or like Flutter or I don't know, maybe Node.js or TypeScript or something like that. Would pick your web programming language or your wallet programming language or whatever that you created your client in, right? So whatever project had its own set of application infrastructure and architecture and programming language and whatever. And so they had to have a library where they could work with the puzzles themselves, and they had to create drivers and interpreters, and they had to be able to do things like look at the particular coins and know how to find them for the user that quote unquote owned them, and then display them and do all of the work required to support that particular coin type. So every player in the ecosystem has to make a decision about what different coin types they're going to support and how they're going to present it to user, how they're going to make a UI around it, and the level of sophistication that they want with respect to those different things. So take like DID, for example. One big project that really took DID and ran with it was Mint Garden. I mean, Mint Garden arguably made more out of a DID than any other project in the entire Chia ecosystem. With a DID, you can go into Mint Garden, you can set a profile picture, it will show your collections, you can do a whole host of stuff that really is outside anything that even exists on the standard. It's not like you put some picture for yourself or your DID onto the chain. Mint Garden made it so that you could do that kind of stuff and that you could associate like a friendlier name with the DID. So like DID didn't give us profile pictures, it didn't give us naming, it didn't give us a whole bunch of stuff that you would normally want with something that would be like an identity. It really just gave us a string of digits that exists on the Chia blockchain, and then a mechanism to associate NFTs with those DIDs. Now, you can definitely do more with it, but nobody really did it except for Mint Garden. So every single part of the ecosystem is really opting into whatever it is that they're doing, and they're opting into it through these mechanisms of taking the standard, making their own UIs around it, having to bring those puzzles into their own code base, and then making the surrounding code around it, and doing something with it. And so every single project, like be it Ozone, Evergreen, Sage Wallet, slowly goes through this process of figuring out what they want to support and what they don't. And Vault, I would say, is like a good example of one where Chia is really excited about Vault and is building tooling around vaults and is building a web-based wallet around vaults. But who else is building around vaults? Like maybe nobody else in the ecosystem. So that's a tool that exists that Chia is picking up and running with, but that no other wallet, no other part of the ecosystem is really working on. And DAO would be one where I'd say, even Chia itself didn't really do much with it. I don't know that they really created a UI around it. I don't know that they created any DAO infrastructure that made it easy to use. And that code is sort of just sitting to the side, waiting for some project to make it their own and to really pick it up and run with it.
You say Chia, and I think CNI.
Yeah, I think maybe I had said Chia and I meant to say CNI for sure. And even that graphic that's center, maybe that ought to be CNI.
Well, I think it's better at Chia, but you see, we see how sticky these or muddled these associations can be, and again, I think that CNI does right by CNI whenever they are concerned with their products, and it's understandable that they need to be developing uh, uh, things with an eye towards what products that are going to sustain them. But so as we discuss this concept of standards and who the players or the stakeholders are, and what this process might look like, another organization bubbles to my mind, and that's the XCH Foundation. And not that I mean to saddle them with the notion of determining what standards on the Chia blockchain are, but I think it would behoove us to begin to think, well, there could be another entity of community members and stakeholders that has or recognizes a set of standards, and we could think in terms of CNI standards and whatever that side organization may be, because I think that we are going to I think it's unreal to expect as more players come to the Chia blockchain, to expect everyone to go to CNI, and as CNI has um, ostensibly more and more customers and more products that they are creating, Permuto, Silicon, whoever they, who whatever their whatever else they have in store for them in their future. It would seem to me that we need to be thinking about a robustness of standards, and what that might look like, that leans more towards um, community input and stakeholder input, and is designed around the community interest in mind, not just certain products in mind.
I think that's a good point, because if you think about CNI as a commercial entity that has certain customers that they're working with, if they are very focused on Permuto, what is their appetite to coming back, to circling back around and putting some of their treasure, time and effort, money into revving the NFT standard if NFT one really is not on the roadmap of any project that they're currently working on? And what is their role in even facilitating such a discussion if they're ostensibly not using it or working on it in any meaningful sense anymore? Is it left to the community to propose an NFT2 standard? Should it happen within the XCH Foundation? I think these are good questions for the community to start asking itself and start saying, what is the relationship and role? If CNI put something out and they did a lot of work to sort of get it good, is it up to the community to make it great? Is it up to the community and those who are valid stakeholders yet that are using these projects to say, if there's a deficiency, then it's up to us to come together to figure this thing out and to fix it and to make it do whatever we want? I think we're probably there. Like, that's probably the right point for the entire ecosystem to finally say, okay, these things were given to us. I mean, that's kind of how it is. Like, it was paid for by CNI and has been given out as free software. But if you want it to be something more, then maybe it's really up to those that are using it to make it whatever it is that they think they need to. And I think it's a great segue into what I think will be the next conversation, when we start talking with some of the creators in the NFT space that have taken it to the next level and that are doing something more with NFT than what was possible under NFT one. And so I'm excited to hear about that, those types of projects, and to see how they plan on, maybe if they really needed royalties, and this is a really important thing, that this actually gets revved at the same time, and maybe we can even fix NFT one without having to fix the standard itself, because the flaw arguably maybe isn't even in the NFT one standard, but rather exists in the interplay of how NFT one works with offers and royalty puzzles. And this stuff's a little bit more complicated than just, it's not just one puzzle. And I think that we're probably overdue for a deep technical dive into how do these things all actually work, because there are some standards that are been heavily leveraged within a lot of different projects that maybe some people don't even know exist. And I'm gonna point my finger directly at Singleton V11. That seems to have been ubiquitously used by almost everything in the Chia ecosystem and seems like it's working the way it's intended. So that's probably the poster child for a standard which actually worked and that no one really talks about and that really didn't get much discussion at all. And it got revved at least once.
Well, and you pointed out to me prior to this episode or prior to our discussion that the NFT one standard is different than the singleton standard, and I thought NFT one was just a synonymous with it. So it's interesting to begin to get into those details and to understand what is built on what and what is the relationship of these puzzles. But as we think about, solutions going forward, I think we also should bear in mind, like, it's best for the community when CNI focuses on their products, because it's not a either or a zero sum game when it comes to what all can exist on this public blockchain. But what we do all benefit from, or all XCH holders benefit from, is pressure on block space. So that if we have more products and more competition for what is being written onto the blockchain, then that helps project holders of NFTs. That helps everyone and everything that's built on Chia blockchain and uses XCH to pay for the transmission of those things that are being recorded. So that's sort of all that I had. I just wanted to close out with that thought that what we're really looking for here is more things that are being built and recorded on the blockchain. So I don't know if you have anything else to add, but I enjoyed digging into this notion of a standard and what possibilities that we have as a Chia community in the future.
Loved it. We'll see you next time on FOMO.